I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I've been thinking about how easy it is for us to fill our lives with things that feel important but don't actually last. They're not bad things, not wrong things, just things that don't matter beyond right now because we stay busy, we stay productive, we build things, grow things, move forward, and still never really stop and ask, what is all of this actually building towards? And the reality is, most of us don't stop long enough to ask that. We just kind of move from one thing to the next. What needs to get done? What bills need to be paid? Where's our next vacation? What's in front of us? What feels productive? And if we're not careful, we build an entire life on routine with no direction, no intention, just stagnation. And this shows up in really normal ways: work, goals, responsibilities, things that actually get us by in the moment. But over time, they start to take up more and more space. And without realizing it, what's urgent starts to replace what's important. Because if we don't ask where this is going, we'll default to whatever is in front of us, what's visible, what we can measure, what feels like progress. But progress towards what? What do our lives actually produce over time? Not just this week, not just this season, but over the course of our entire lives. And it's interesting because Jesus talks about this in Matthew 6:19-21. It says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and dust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And that's easy to agree with, but harder to actually live because everything around us pushes us towards what we can see, what we can measure, what we can show. And eternal impact doesn't always look like that. I think a lot of us hear that, but don't really slow down enough to ask where that actually looks like and how we're living. So there's another verse that comes to mind: Proverbs 13:22. "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous." Now, normally we think about the first part, the inheritance for children's children, but the second part says the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. That means it's possible for us to spend our lives building something and not actually be the ones that it ultimately serves, and not even realize it while we're doing it. And that's what makes this so interesting. It's not obvious and it doesn't feel wrong. It actually feels like progress, but progress in the wrong direction is still misalignment. Think about that. All the effort, all the time, all the focus, building, growing, accumulating. At the end, it doesn't even align with what God is doing. And that's not just about money. That's just our entire lives. Because the question isn't just what we're building, it's is what we're building actually aligned with something that lasts? Like, because we can build something that works, something that grows, something that looks successful, and still be building something temporary. And if that's the case, then what we're building, what we're pouring our lives into, doesn't move beyond us. So what's the point of doing it in the first place? And the truth is, there really isn't one outside of us just functioning here on earth. But how does that serve us? Because we all want our lives to matter. We want to build something meaningful. But if we're honest, we don't always evaluate what we're building against eternity. So, what if we thought about our lives from the end looking back? If we could step outside of our current pace and look back at everything, what would actually stand out? What would we wish we gave more time to? What would we realize didn't matter as much as we thought? What will we see that actually grew in the next generation? Because this doesn't happen all at once. It's not like we decide to live for things that don't matter. It happens slowly through small decisions, small priorities, small shifts in focus. And over time, that becomes our direction. All the things we've talked about this season: identity, purpose, vision, none of that is just about improving our lives. It's about aligning our lives with something eternal. But if that alignment isn't there, we can take all of it and still aim at the wrong thing, because naturally, we don't think this way. We get pulled into whatever is immediate, what's visible, what feels like progress. That's why we need to be led. Because left on our own, we don't drift towards eternal impact. We drift away from it. So if we're honest, what are our lives actually building right now? Not what we intend, not what we say we want. What our actions actually producing? And if nothing changed, if we kept going at the same pace with the same focus, where does that lead? And does it last? So living for eternal impact doesn't start with doing more. It starts with seeing our lives differently. And when that changes, what we build starts to change with it. So before we even get into what to do, we need to define what we're actually aiming at, because eternal impact sounds good, but if we don't understand what it actually means, we'll still default back to building what's temporary. Now, What lasts is not what we build for ourselves. It's what God does through us. So in Matthew 28:19-20, Jesus gives the command to the disciples to go out and make disciples of all nations. That's not just about belief, it's about multiplication. It's about people being transformed and then helping others be transformed. So what does that actually look like in real life? It comes down to this. Eternal impact is anything that points people to Christ, builds people in truth, and develops people into who God created them to be. Not just church activity, not spiritual moments. It's our lives, it's our leadership, it's our work, it's our conversations, it's how we treat people, it's how we lead people, it's how we show up. We can build a business and still build for eternity. We can build a team and still build for eternity. We can raise a family and still build for eternity, but it depends on what we're actually doing through it. So here's the thing. Two people can build the exact same thing on the surface. Same role, same job, same levels of success, but one is building something that lasts and one isn't. Let's take an example. Let's take a leader in a company. One builds poor performance, numbers, results, growth, and that's where it stops. And another leader, they do all that stuff, but they pursue excellence. They still grow, they still perform, but they're developing people. They're leading with integrity. They're pointing people towards truth. They're influencing people, how people live, think, and grow. Same environment, different foundation. One produces results, one produces impact. Two people, both successful, both influential, both builders, but what they built was completely different. Now, let's use a real example from the Bible. Let's look at somebody like Solomon. Solomon had everything: wisdom, wealth, influence, power, women. He built cities, systems, infrastructures. He expanded the kingdom from the outside that looked like the peak of success. But when we read Ecclesiastes, we see how he actually reflects on it. He says he built houses, planted vineyards, acquired wealth, surrounded himself with everything he could want. And at the end of it, he calls it vanity, meaningless, chasing after the wind. Not because what he built was bad, but because it was centered on himself. It didn't carry beyond him the way that he thought it would. Now, contrast with that with somebody like Paul. So Paul didn't build wealth. He didn't build status. He didn't build something that looked impressive from the outside, but he built people. He discipled. He taught truth. He strengthened churches. He poured his life into others. And because of that, what he built is still impacting people today. Same concept of building, different foundation. Solomon built for himself, and even he said it didn't last the way that he thought. Paul built through obedience, and what he built carried far beyond his life. And when Solomon gets to the end of his life, after building everything, experiencing everything, and realizing what didn't last, he doesn't leave it open-ended. He actually gives us a really clear conclusion. So in Ecclesiastes 12, he starts by saying to remember your creator in the days of your youth. So in other words, don't wait until the end of your life to think about God. Don't build everything first and try to bring God into it later. Start with him. Then he closes it by saying, at the end of all that matter, all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And then he adds that God will bring every deed into judgment, whether good or evil. So when you take that together, the meaning of life is not found in what we build for ourselves. It's found in a life that's centered on God, lived in obedience to him, knowing that everything that we do ultimately answers to him. And that's the difference. Eternal impact is not about what we build. It's about what we're building, producing beyond us. So now that we understand that, the question becomes, how do we actually build that way? So let's do your playbook. Play one, put God back at the center. Everything starts here. Not our goals, not our plans, not what we're trying to build, God. This means we intentionally create space to actually walk with him, not just believe in him. Time in the word, prayer, being led, not just informed, because whatever sits at the center of our lives will shape everything else. And if God is not at the center, something else will be. And over time, that will direct our decisions and our priorities and what we build without us even realizing it. Play two. Build through obedience, not preference. So we stop filtering our decisions through what we want, what feels right, or what looks good, and we start filtering through alignment. What is God actually calling us to do? Because something can work, something can grow, something can look successful and still not be what we're supposed to build. Obedience keeps us aligned. Preference pulls us off course. And if we don't make that shift, we can spend years building something that was never ours to build in the first place. Play three. focused on stewardship, not outcomes. So our responsibility is not to control results, it's to be faithful with what God has already placed in front of us. The people, the opportunities, the influence, the responsibility. Because when we focus on outcomes, we start trying to control things that were never ours to control. But when we focus on stewardship, we stay consistent. Eternal impact is not building by chasing results, it's building through consistent faithfulness over time. That produces good fruit. Play for, build people, not just things. What lasts is not just what we produce, it's who we develop. Like I mentioned earlier in Matthew 28, we're not just living our lives, we're helping people grow, align, and step into what God has for them. That shows up in how we lead, how we serve, how we invest in others, and how we speak, and even how we show up daily. Because things can grow and disappear, but people carry impact forward. Play 5. Evaluate and realign consistently. So here's the thing, we don't drift once, we drift slowly. So we have to step back regularly and ask what if what we're building still align with God, or have we defaulted back to what's just in front of us? Because drift is subtle. It doesn't feel like we're doing anything wrong. It just slowly pulls us away from what matters most. Regular evaluation keeps us aligned and keeps us building intentionally. And when we live this way, something changes. We're still building, we're still working, we're still moving forward, but now it's aligned. Now it's centered. Now it actually carries beyond us because we're not just building for ourselves anymore. We're building in a way that reflects on God, serves people, and has impact beyond this life. And this is where we land this first season, not on more information, not on more ideas, but on what we're actually going to do with it. Because everything we talked about, identity, purpose, vision, environment, action, none of that matters if it doesn't translate into how we live. And at this point, we don't need more clarity. We just need alignment. We need to stop building by default and start building on purpose. Not just what works, not just for what grows, but for what actually lasts. Because at the end of all of it, our lives are going to reflect what we gave ourselves to. Not what we intend, not what we said mattered, what we actually built. So the question is simple. What are we going to build from here? Because this doesn't end with this episode. This is where it starts. Now, I hope you enjoyed season 1 of the Eternal Playbook. Please take all the information you've gotten and apply it and pass it on. So there's so much more coming in season 2 and beyond. But for now, let's get to work.